just echoing what you said, we lock arms around the mission and the values of what we do, and we're not reinventing things or trying to move from being a butterfly to being an orange or something crazy in transformation. Rather, we're trying to take all the goodness and to say, okay, what's the needful of this generation? How do we communicate it? How do we continue to stay relevant and to push the mission forward into the next generation? Welcome to the Leveraging Success podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Gearhart. Every time we're together, we're here to bring you strategies to work less, make more, and with your margin, be an incredible parent, be incredible in the kingdom, be an incredible spouse. All of those things can work in tandem with the success that you're going to leverage from your career. Recently, I got to be with my mentor, Bob Shank. Bob Shank's the founder of the Master's Program. And as many of you know, I get to be a part of the Master's Program. I get to lead it as the CEO and coach it. It's an incredible organization. And Bob's been a mentor to hundreds of people, really many thousands of people. And you're going to get to hear a special discussion that we had in this bonus episode, an opportunity for you to hear about how can you do succession well. For succession to work, it takes a strong amount of conversation, leadership, and someone with a vision with which to bring someone else along. And to be clear, Bob, you've helped me come along behind you. And it was a number of years ago where I told you that I would love to follow you, come behind everything that you've done. You blazed trails. You were the one that set up a platform by founding the Master's Program, building the intellectual property, creating relationships, and then building success of this program. God going with you and being behind everything that you've done, that allowing for a ministry to exist. And it's one that's very important. And whether we're talking about the Master's Program, any church program, or any ministry that's out there, any organization, business even, everyone grapples with the question of succession. How do I pass this off? Does this work within the family structure? Does this work in a relationship? Who do I find? Is it build from the inside, buy on the outside? How do you make all those things work? Bob, we want to have this conversation together because you and I think we're having a level of success so far, and I am deeply grateful for the way you've brought me along in this. Maybe set up some of your thoughts because you were the founder, and this is your baby. To be clear, you birthed this and you gave me an opportunity to come along behind you. Could you tell me a little bit about some of your feelings around that and thoughts, just as we're setting up this conversation for those who are listening?
Jeff, my vantage point just says that I believe that every generation enters the stream of history believing that the world started with their consciousness and the world will effectively end when they breathe their last or when they retire to some beach somewhere. That we operate as if our lifetime is the only thing that matters. There's a shock that happens when we come to realize that we're not going to live forever, that our generation is inherently truncated in this flow of history, and that an insensitivity to the generations that are behind us will result in us living lives that have no residual effect because what we've done will die with us. And if I'm just starting with a look at the scriptures, God's always talked about generations. But for whatever reason, I've just been living in this Christian community for the last 50 years and recognizing that conversation about generations doesn't happen much. We operate as if everybody's part of our cohort. And if they don't, they ought to act like it. And to come to realize that generations are by God's design and that succession is simply gazing reality with a 2020 view and saying, if what I've been doing is meaningful and if it should continue beyond me, getting my arms around generations and valuing and recognizing the continuing uniqueness of each wave of societal and kingdom history is to play in a very small way in the same world that God has always operated within.
Bob, the I think if I'm thinking about who we have in our crowd and who would be listening to this and asking, how do you as a founder go through the thought process of handing something off with all the risk that's involved, all the potential of what could go wrong, as much as what could go right? Could you speak to your thought process setting this up as someone that's done fantastically as a founder, originator, entrepreneur? How do you think about this when you start to look at those that are coming behind you? How do you hand off? Well, what is your mindset with this that God gave you first?
It really comes down to whether or not I believe that I'm managing what God owns and has entrusted to me, or whether I have implicit or explicit ownership of what I do and the effect of what I do, and I have control over its start and finish, and that I have no responsibility to pass it along to people who are behind me in this generational flow. We started the master's program with a kind of an understanding that we were boomers serving boomers, and our community was made up of people who were within our same age cohort. About 15 years ago, we started talking at the board level about the fact that it appeared that God was opening the door to successive generations who were beginning to benefit from what we were offering, but also had a desire to be part of the delivery system to perpetuate it beyond our generational effective years. And the more we began to recognize at the board level that we all had expiration dates, whether we wanted to admit it or not, but we got honest about life and honest about our mortality and just said, consciously and intentionally, we're going to plan succession rather than it being foisted on us when we can't avoid it. We're going to operate with an anticipation of it as a desirable, beneficial component of our future design.
Bob, we're going to talk about the biblical model for succession, and we can make a case for that. I was reading when Abraham was having his servant sent out to go find a wife for his son, in this delicate moment where his wife's died, his son doesn't have a wife yet, and the promise that God's made to come through for his son, he gets the servant, hey, put your hand under my thigh, and I need you to swear to do what I'm about to ask you to do. And so there's this intent that Abraham says, look, I know what God wants to happen here. He's made a promise. Now I need you that are coming behind me to follow through on these steps so that this goes the way it's supposed to go. You can go through that to Solomon's son, where it goes all wrong, and everything in between. Could you tell us a little bit about the biblical model and why it's so important to be thinking about this so that the good things don't die with leaders?
Struck with the fact that as we read Matthew 17 and the Mount of Transfiguration, you and I have visited that spot in Israel together. And it heralds the story of Jesus along with Peter and James and John, leaving the other 9 apostles behind. And Jesus took them up onto that mountain. And when they got there, Jesus appeared in a very different form to those 3 guys. And along with him were Moses and Elijah. Now, there's all kinds. I mean, you could preach a month-long series on just that story, but it's striking for me to recognize that with Jesus and Moses and Elijah there in that conversation on that mountaintop, one of the distinguishing characteristics of those 3 leaders and their life missions was that in each case, they invested in a next generation leader who took the mantle from them and carried it into the future. For Moses, that was Joshua. For Elijah, that was Elisha. And for Jesus, it was the 12 apostles. And each of them operated with the belief that their successors were going to accomplish more than they did in their lifetime. that their successors were not just going to manage the enterprise that they had launched, but they were in fact going to accelerate it into even greater, grander, wider, more meaningful expressions than it had been true for them during their watch. And that wasn't a competitive dismissal of their prominence or importance. In fact, they are elevated in biblical history as significant in their own generation, but across history. I think sometimes that it's tempting for leaders to believe that no one can replace them and that the temptation is there to almost sabotage the idea of someone who would come behind them and resist the idea that there is a successor whose tutelage will include the transfer of best wisdom from the person who preceded them. And that because of that, with the wind of God's Spirit behind them and the confidence that they found their own lane, that God makes the results from the next generation's leadership even more significant. But in the meantime, predecessors are not forgotten. They are still remembered and revered for the part that they had played.
No doubt about it, Bob. Fact of the matter is that you're one of a kind, but one of the greatest blessings that came through this succession process was both me realizing that I'm one of a kind and your encouragement for me to be myself and not try to replace you or have your giftings and all that God did through you. And so my favorite comparison in this realm that you're setting up for is the thought of the trailblazer in Elijah and the successor in Elisha who came back behind and had followed Elijah and said, "Hey, where you go, I'm going to go. I don't care what it takes." And and that was always the thought of following you, but realizing that there's a difference. There's a different period of time that I'm playing in and following you. There are lessons to be extrapolated from your trailblazing that can be applied, but are again unique to the circumstance of our time and what we're going through in this season and what the world needs, et cetera. How do you match up that Elijah Elisha model for anyone that's thinking about someone that they've been raising up or bringing along to take over and multiply what they started?
Jeff, I believe that the final chapter of a leader's term of leadership to follow a biblical model includes the identifying and preparing of a successor. That internal succession is the model that God has included in the biblical history from Old to New Testaments. The whole idea of a search committee has no precedent if you look at the way God has operated through time and through his biblical history that he wants us to know and be informed by. And so, gosh, I encouraged my board 5 years ago to begin a serious pursuit of the plan for what handing off and intentionally energizing a next generation of leadership to look like. And we hired the best governance coach who happened to be a graduate of the master's program and a good friend. But there was a task force of our board formed to work around the question of what we needed to do as a ministry organization to be ready for next generation leadership. And as we did that, I was not part of that task force. It was hands off for me by my election, by my intent to keep it from being in any way compromised by anybody feeling like celebrating a future leader was in some way disloyal or dishonoring to me. I didn't want any of that coming in to corrupt the process. And as God would have designed it, and he does, but as God designed it, it turned out that we were ready for the succession process when I had this very unexpected health diagnosis 2 years ago that had a very low odds of me surviving to this point. But it wasn't unsettling for us as a ministry. We had already worked through the parameters of the process to hand the baton to the next generation, being you. And it became as natural as it could possibly be. And for that, God gets the glory. We were just fortunate to operate with an understanding that if this movement was going to continue into the future, it was going to require some deliberate, intentional effort on our part.
I'm here with Bob Shank, the founder of the Master's Program. For many of you, like me, you consider him a spiritual father, mentor, and coach. And if you've had the chance to be underneath him and learn from him through the Master's Program, your life's been greatly impacted. I know that that's been my story. Now, Bob, we've been in this conversation that is about transferring a legacy, and we've just started the process of talking from generation to generation. The big question is, how do you transfer a legacy? Can you take a shot at that and help us to understand how you've thought about that?
Well, it's tempting to think that anything that the first founding generation did is tantamount to Scripture. That it's etched in stone, it's irreplaceable in not only its core ideologies and its basic belief system, but all of the details about how it's delivered and how you dress and how you serve the people that you're out to serve, that all of those are equally inspired by God and required to be maintained in their original form. Well, we live in a world that rejects that idea out of hand. I mean, we'd all be driving around in Model Ts if that was the case, but realized in our commercial lives that progress is never dishonoring to the founders. In fact, it takes what they set in motion and takes it to even greater outcomes than they would have imagined possible in the first generation. That's the way God operates. And so we determined early on that it was core mission and core values that were going to be protected and maintained. And everything beyond that was going to be subject to biblical boundaries, certainly, but it was going to be generationally sensitive to the audience that we were out to serve in the oncoming flow of generational history. The reality is that we were pretty good with boomers, and we were fairly effective with baby busters, the Generation X. But as soon as you look beyond Gen X, who were already modifying their values and methods and culture and approach, boy, by the time the millennials came along, they accelerated that transformation dramatically. And we're still not fully aware of what Gen Z is going to be about as they continue to mature into their time at the wheel. But to not reinvent ourselves in terms of the delivery system, in terms of the platforms on which we are encountering and impacting people. If this was all left to the genius that would be found in my generation, and that's just a cheap way of saying me, if it was left to me to be innovating for the new generation, we would be in a retirement village trying to get people together for a Bible study. We wouldn't have an effective appeal to a new generation who need to know how to be kingdom leaders in a world that is different than the world that that I was born into, or even the world that you were born into.
Yeah, Bob, I'm running ahead of you. You're handing me a baton, and let's talk a little nitty gritty here about that baton handoff and how this works from a generation to generation standpoint. First of all, from my perspective, just echoing what you said, we lock arms around the mission and the values of what we do, and we're not reinventing things or trying to move from being a butterfly to being an orange or something crazy in transformation. Rather, we're trying to take all the goodness and to say, okay, what's the needful of this generation? How do we communicate it? How do we continue to stay relevant and to push the mission forward into the next generation? But there's several things that go through my mind as I'm taking this from you. Is that first of all, all good things eventually end. And so it's not my intention to be on my watch to be the end guy. In fact, I want to see this go as far as it can go. And if God helping us, there's another person to come behind me, then I'll do that job. But I also understand the cycle of there are things that will naturally finish and new things that will start and continue on. So as we go through those cycles, there's things that I need to bring that are changes, that are different than, that are, again, either relevant to the moment, the needful to scale, to reach, to grow, and go where we've got to go. From your seat, as you're handing that off, what are some of the things that you're praying, you're supporting, or you're doing to make this go from your seat, as you're the one reaching out your hand to give me that baton? How do you process that? Especially because, Bob, everyone knows your story is that you were lying in a hospital bed, and thankfully it turned out much better than we thought it could have been at that time. But at that time, we did not know what the future held and what God had in store. But nonetheless, in that moment, you were, rushing to hand that off. How were you processing, and even maybe what were you telling your board members, either privately or in session, to try to help this go the way that you're hoping it to go?
Jeff, great questions. I would say it this way. We've got a decided advantage that is inherent in what we do and who we serve and what the outcomes, the master's program and Priority Living's ministry really is. By that, I simply mean that the net output of our ministry is leaders who have come to understand that their leadership is instilled in them by God and is elevated to eternal value as they find their kingdom lane and accelerate into it. And so the idea of leaders who are going to arrive with vision and strategies for things that have never been attempted before, but are addressing either chronic issues or new contemporary issues that require a kingdom address, a kingdom framework, to be able to see God at work, bringing solutions where mankind only brings problems. So here we are, surrounded by leaders whom we've invested time and relationship and training into. And so we're surrounded by leaders who we trust. They're part of our family. And when they propose innovative ways to either do what we've been doing historically in different ways, but maintaining the integrity of what our original anticipation and outcomes were, but finding new ways to get there. And then our posture has been to not shut them down and saying there's no room for innovation or creative genius in this movement. Instead, we've just said, boy, if you've got a great idea and it can accelerate the movement, we'll not just give you permission, but we'll back you and formulate ways to incorporate that into the larger context of who we are and what we do. And so, surrounded by leaders who freshen the movement constantly, some of the natural tendencies for an enterprise to become institutionalized and become a little out of date and then way past its expiration dates, we're finding constant refresh with entrepreneurial genius being unleashed in the movement, and us allowing that and celebrating it as God brings it along.
Hmm. Bob Shank, founder of Priority Living, now nearly 40 years ago, if I remember the time frame right. Bob, you were encouraged to start Priority Living by a couple of mentors of you. I'd love to hear that story. I don't know that everyone knows that story of two mentors, and if I'm not mistaken, a fishing trip encouraging you to say you should lead, you should step out. You form Priority Living, which becomes a Bible study to business professionals, and then its ongoing iteration that eventually led through all the way to what was formed as the master's program in 1997, and some of the history of that. Would you tell a little bit of that? Because I'd love to set that up as how do we go from one leader to the next leader in an organization? Would you tell that story?
Well, I'll compress it greatly, Jeff. The Bible says in the multitude of counselors, there's victory. And it wasn't one crazy guy who was sending me off on a suicide mission, but it was a collection of older leaders whom I respected deeply. There were some guys like McNair and Lauren Grissett, Chuck Swindoll, operating in successive engagement with me, who were promoting me into trusting what God was already revealing in terms of giftedness and vision for me to go after my tribe, which was marketplace leaders, in a way that would be both fresh for the generation, which Mac McNair was an accomplished guy, a Air Force fighter pilot, a instructor at the University of North Carolina in their business school, a candidate for governor at one point in Georgia, a strategic consultant who I respected highly, a great communicator who could capture a room of men and get them standing at attention and marching in formation if he wanted to. But Mac made a deliberate determination to invest his time on younger leaders. He told Bill Bright, who was a friend of his, that he was going to spend less time with him, helping him with Campus Crusade, and more time with guys like me, who were the next generation and ensuring Mac's legacy. Swindoll told me that despite my lack of seminary training, that I could communicate more effectively with business people than he could because I spoke their language and understood their paradigms, and Chuck didn't. Those were significant voices who were helping me to realize that perhaps it was not crazy for a guy with a high school education and a business license to, after 15 years in the marketplace, shift gears and head into a career track in professional ministry that ultimately allowed us to minister to thousands of people in the marketplace in our earliest days, but ultimately mature into what became the master's program. And I'm happily out of my leadership era, but I haven't retired. And the culture, in its ignorance, sees those as the only options. You're either working or you're retired. I've moved from leadership to investor status, and I'm not retired, but I'm spending my time and taking the things of great value that I have after 50 years of marketplace and ministry leadership and pouring it back into leaders like you and leaders like the graduates of the program over the last 25 years, and making what I have, wisdom, relationships, money, my leverage of my brand and identity. I invest in people whose ministries and lives and missions I believe in, to see the multiple effect. Two are better than one because there's a good return for their labor. I'm getting to do that today.
Bob, you were poured into by these men, and you were pouring yourself into many, like me and many, many others. I want to go back to what you said earlier, because I don't know that it may have dropped for everyone like it did for me. And I think it's so important, because the question at hand is, how does one leader do a good job of handing off to the next leader? And what you said earlier was that a search committee, if that's the beginning, if I understood right, if that's the beginning of your succession process, you're probably way behind the eight ball already. Can you speak to that and tie those things together?
Yeah, search committees are great in the marketplace because it's impersonal, it's perfunctory, it's by formula, and that's all fine. But in the context of a movement that represents the kingdom of God, there's an EQ that has to go along with the IQ. And a lot of that comes from the gut rather than from a look at a resume and a vita that has accomplishments and academic accreditation and the other perfunctory things attached to it, which, by the way, we already know that in the modern era, about half of resumes are bogus at some level in terms of what they're reporting about the candidate. I just believe that we operate in a space where it's all relational. And if there isn't a relational component, the organizational component will be strained and shallow at best. That if there isn't a vibrant spiritual connection on the part of a predecessor and a successor, it's just never going to go the way that the best transitions will go. And I've been able to watch, gosh, I happened to be sitting at a restaurant table in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan in November of 1995 with Franklin and Jane Graham, his wife, Billy Graham, and me, table for four. And Billy and Franklin were doing a joint crusade in Saskatoon that weekend. Franklin had asked me to come and be part of it with him. And that was the evening that Billy asked Franklin if he would allow him to put his name in candidacy with his board to be his successor. And a month later, Billy made that request of his board, and they didn't go into a national search. They trusted Billy's gut and proved that. And it was a decade before the effective transfer of power occurred. But it happened in a very reasoned and appropriate way. And there was a transfer of power that occurred over the space of time. And by the time it finally occurred, there was no pushback. And the certification of Franklin's leadership as being handpicked by God was embraced by everybody who needed to have a weigh in on it. I just believe that God calls leaders, not just founder leaders, but successor leaders, because God always intends that the things that matter the most don't die with the leader who humanly got them started.
Bob, that's a great story. And you think about Billy looking at his son and saying, gosh, I see myself in you, and you've built credibility, and it's a natural run to come alongside of me and take this grand thing that God's done through me over. Now, and not everyone has the opportunity to look at their progeny, their DNA, and say, hey, son or daughter, I think that you should take this over. And of course, while I'd like to think that I've got some Shank in me, I don't carry your name. And so the truth of the matter is that at some level, you've decided, one, I'm going to build, not buy. And the building process is to identify and to pour in and to figure out how you're going to help grow that and give opportunity and seed that so that it has the opportunity to grow and go forward, even while unquestionably who's coming behind you and me in this example doesn't have your ministry context, credibility, background, and what you've established. My credibility comes different with a different story, but not the same. And so it can be my frame of reference, Bob. I'm a Cincinnati Reds fan all growing up. I came out of the womb with a number 14 jersey on, Pete Rose, and great player. And everyone probably knows that story. But what vexes me about that story is that here he is, one of the greatest players of all time, hit king for sure, becomes the manager of the Reds, and then they can't succeed. They consistently hit second place year after year after year in the 80s. And so the bottom line is that you have somebody that's extremely capable that can't hand it off or take that success that they've personally experienced and translate that into a multiplier to others. So Bob, here you are in a place where you've decided to build and to go through that process, even though it's not your DNA, not someone that's got your last name. How do you think through that process and in helping others to sort of start to think of how do I find and build and support and grow that so that the opportunity, even if it's not just one, it's several that you're trying to lead so that leaders replicate themselves? What do you do to try to put that in play and get it rolling so that it's successful?
Jeff, while succession within a human family is certainly credible and and there are examples of it working well, it's not inherently superior. It's workable, but it isn't necessitated. We have the benefit of operating in more than a mystical family of God kind of a context. We recognize that we have people who are closer than family who don't share our DNA, and that 23andMe has no idea who the people are that would give their lives for me and me for them, because the relationship's founded on a common faith and given to the pursuit of similar objectives and missions and movements, brings people together in a profound way. The truth is that there's a temptation when you're within a family system to think that the progeny has to somehow be a carbon copy of the founder before them. And nothing is more dishonoring to the creator than to think that he has to make multiples across generations. The combination of competencies that are required in each season of a movement or organization's life becomes very different. You've got a collection of competencies that I don't have. I have a collection of competencies that you do not have. Mine happened to be just right for the part that I got to play in getting this movement up and rolling and investing a quarter century into the master's program model before handing it to you and to the team that you've brought around you. And the competencies that you and your team have are things that I watch and am in wonder of. I'm seeing how gifted God has made you and the other folks that surround you, and recognize that if those gifts had been at the table 25 years ago, we wouldn't have had a use for them. We wouldn't have had a methodology or a means by which their contributions could have been maximized. But you've come at exactly the right time, and you've collected the outcomes and the assets from this 25-year run up of the master's program, and you're putting those into a new formula and taking that forward. But the DNA is the same. The willingness to say someone else can do this better than me is an act of leadership that marks the best players. The men and women that will be remembered the longest are the ones that let it go the easiest.
We are getting to have an amazing conversation, one that I hope that you're enjoying here with Bob Shank, author of Life Mastery, speaker and founder of Priority Living and the Master's Program. Bob, we're here talking about this process that's really about replicating yourself at the end of the day. One of the greatest blessings that I did not see coming was that when I was allowed to coach the master's program, that all of a sudden this blessing of what I thought was a work to give actually became the blessing of growth within me. This natural, I needed to get deep in the content. I needed to be authentic with my life. I needed to go into a place with which it wasn't just a set of words, but something I truly lived, and that it got into the roots of my mind. And that was an enormous blessing. And so then all of a sudden, I realized that, okay, my job is to replicate myself. And if I was to follow what Jesus told me to do, to go and make disciples, then this process of replication would not only be an enormous blessing to those that would get to hear how to follow God in a way that brings incredible life balance, margin, and focus, but to also understand the blessing for the coach or the leader, or the one that's bringing others to follow God while they're following me while I'm following God. So this replicating process is an amazing blessing in a two-way street form. Could you speak to that? I mean, was this in something, because I felt like it was a secret you didn't tell me. And then I got the benefit of it one day, and I realized the light bulb came on, and I saw this sort of multiplication thing that I want everyone to experience the same way.
God is defined by His grace, among other things. The relationship we have with our Heavenly Father is a relationship in which grace becomes a facet, a tenant of what makes him tick. And grace is the core ingredient in what we often call blessings. And God distributes blessings not as a high value present that we then get to take and sequester and hide away, but we crack it open and share those things that God blesses us with. And as we do that, He watches and is so honored by the value we give to what He gave to us that He gives us more that we get to use to replicate His style in our relationship with other people. He loves to bless us, and then He loves to watch us bless other people. And if He doesn't see us blessing other people, the pipeline that is flowing with His fresh blessing constantly being delivered to us will go stale because we're not distributing it in the manner that He intended that we would distribute it. And so what you're experiencing, Jeff, is the mystery and the magic of how God operates. The more we give away what He's given to us, the more He replaces it with more and better and latest version and whatever. So the worst decision I could ever make is to hoard what I have. The best decision I could ever make is to find a way to make it available to other people so that they can benefit from what God's entrusted to me. And when that happens, I don't come out with less at the other end. I come out with more.
Yeah. Yeah, this was God's plan. This was the way that he envisioned it. It wasn't that we would be the cul-de-sac of all that good thing, but blessed to be a blessing. And it's not just although it's certainly indicative in the way that I give, not only the tithes that I have, but the offerings, but also the way that I keep in relationship. And how can I have this wisdom and these good things and not have others come along behind me, and that includes not only my family but anyone that I can build into my influence. And the more influence that I can build, the more opportunity for others to come along with me. And I just, it's more than a stage. I mean, certainly stage has the ability to communicate to many people, but life on life, ability to push, prod, encourage, correct, train, all of those things help to see people, me and others, get replicated into, and then to pour that into others, and hear the opportunity to see a movement for Christ come when people can really see the incredible things of God show up in their life, and then bring it to others, and they can get lit up the same way. This is I don't know. This is I almost call it like a secret. It's not meant to be a secret, but it's one of these side benefits that never had been maybe as clear to me for whatever reason, without anyone being at fault. It's just simply all of a sudden the penny drops for me, and I'm realizing that this replicating game is really what the leader's role is to who's following you. If you're a leader, prove it. And if you're really a leader, someone's following you. And if they're following you, they're pursuing what you have, and you're living a life that says, I have something to offer.
Jeff, I've been in organizational life for the last 52 years, self-supporting from the time I was 17, in fact. But I've been in organizational leadership for 45 years. And in the early stages of one's leadership life, it's easy to replicate management. Management says, I'm going to get as much power as I can get, and I'm going to hold on to it and not give it away. And then I'm going to pretend that I'm irreplaceable so that I can have some level of security and some leverage to get more for me. The breakthrough from manager to leader occurs when you get to the place where you say, instead of hoarding power, I'm going to give it away. And I want to find people around me who can replace me in parts of the system that I serve and do. And that the role of a leader is to be constantly giving away the responsibility for what they have been doing in support of the organization. In the early decades of one's leadership life, that normally uses cohorts within your own generation. You're handing off to people who are of the same category of age that you are. In the later stages of your organizational leadership life, if that doesn't metamorphose into a giveaway power to next generation people who are the age of your kids, who are the life of the future embodied in an oncoming leadership cohort, then the decline and death of the organization has been assured. And getting to the place where you can both be a leader who gives away power and then a legacy person who gives it away to someone a generation beneath you is the biblical model. It's the organizational desirable predominant success model. But for whatever reason, it's not practiced with open handedness often enough. I want to both practice it and then I want to challenge the people that are under my influence to be doing the same thing. I'm circling back 2,000 graduates of our master's program. And my message to them is if they're under 55, I'm asking the question, how can I be supportive of you in your leadership? What do I have that could help you be better at what you're doing? But if they're over 55, I'm asking the question, are you getting ready to hand off? Are you underway with a deliberate, intentional process by which the transfer of power is occurring from you to someone who's 20 or more years younger than you? And those are the challenges. And I'll be asking those questions, those uncomfortable questions, until I get transferred to headquarters one day.
But Bob, there's so much to lose, and this is the kicker of what we're talking about here. There's so much opportunity to lose. You look at so many great, amazing leaders who have in their lifetime seen God use them immensely, and you've been able to be on their boards, be privately consulting them, and you've seen incredible gains. But the big question is, who will I hand this off to? And as you say it, Bob, is the only way that I'm going to leave this position going to be horizontally. And so is that then the outcome? And you know what we've been talking about here is not only the encouragement, but the process by which you're seeing people come behind you and take things over. But what we have to lose is that all of the things that God has installed in you and created through you could die with you. And I think when we look at the world, and by the way, when we look at the world, we can't just look at it through the North American lens, because in the North American lens, Christianity is on the decline. From seeing people de-church to the moral decay. We look outside of North America and we see the rest of the world, and the gospel's growing, and people are saying yes to Jesus like never before. And we're seeing people see Jesus in their dreams and come to know him, and people be discipled miraculously. And then all of a sudden, we shouldn't be surprised when more and more they're coming to North America to evangelize us here. Mm-hmm. But that aside, just coming back to what is at stake here, as we look at what's ahead in God's great history book that's being written here and his timing for when things are going to happen, the opportunity is, will we be found faithful with our lives? And part of that faithfulness is the handoff. And I think that's what we have to lose. I think it's a big deal. I'd hate to think that all the incredible things that God did through you, for instance, would have been shuttered, maybe the IP and assets sold off, and that would have been that. But how many ministries can you think of, or organizations that are worth replicating, are going to die with the founder?
It's been a privilege for me to be able to work with multiple ministries that were founder-led and now effectively initiated transfer of power to a next generation of leadership. And it's a role, frankly, that as you've already discovered, that there are nonprofits that are asking you and me for input about how to make that happen. It's an unusual but desirable model when the founder leader will initiate open-handedly the initiation of the process that will transfer power and will allow them to effectively retire out of leadership, but step into legacy and continue to be involved on a broader front with transferring what God's entrusted to them into a next wave of leaders within their organization past, but then more broadly as well. It's interesting to me that what we're talking about here is at the core of what America is embroiled in when in the next 12 months we're going to be choosing it, apparently, and the primaries are still before us. But if the election was held today, we're going to choose between two guys who are likely to die during their first or their next term. That the actuaries would say that men of their vintage don't have much time left on their game clock. And then we look into the Senate and in the Congress as well, we find people who have aged out of their effectiveness, and a new generation is screaming to be let in, to be able to work for their generation, to do what they feel like they've been called to do. But this death grip, this chokehold on, I'm not going to let go because my only sense of value is found in being the currently in power leader. And I am a big believer in the notion that every stage of life is an invitation to better days than the ones past, and an invitation into post-organizational leadership to reach into that new season of legacy is an invitation to better days. And may I just say that bucket lists, by and large, are an absolute abomination of biblical principle. The idea that I'm here to have my experience of paradise before I die dismisses the incredible promise of a new heaven and a new earth, a millennium, a world where Jesus is the king and all things are right. As long as I'm functional here, I will have Sabbath time and refreshment, and I'll enjoy what God's put around me. But I'm not here to just sort of play out my wish list. I'm here to make sure that whatever God's entrusted to me in terms of capacity, I'm passing on to a new generation. They're going to take it, leverage it, multiply it, and I'll own some share of that continuing agenda as it unfolds into the future.
Bob, I want to thank you so much on behalf of everyone for the way that you've modeled this succession process. You've executed it, and you've shown us how to live and lead in legacy. From whether I'm talking about my kids or maybe perhaps in the future, my kids' kids, I have a process by which I can see now modeled for me. How do I replicate myself and how do I work to raise them up? And then to think the same thing about how many more people can I get to come with me where I'm going to follow Christ in a deeper way, to find their life's calling, to know the mission that Jesus has called them to, and to arrange all of their life to make that happen. Thank you, Bob. Thank you for what you've done, pouring into me, pouring into thousands of leaders to see a replicated movement, and that Jesus would be honored through that.
I'm here to bet the farm on you and your team, Jeff, taking us go forward.
Hey, we're here in a bonus section and an opportunity to talk with Bob Shank, founder of the Master's Program. Bob, you're passionate about the Great Commission. And the Master's Program, what we've been setting everyone up to is arrange your life so that your career is in the highest integrity possible, that your family, your marriage, and your children are world class, and that people come behind you and want to know, how did you do that? Because I see you doing all those amazing things, and you've got these incredible initiatives in the kingdom space. I don't know how you've managed to do all of that. If you ask me, and when I first met you, Bob, and you proposed that you could be great in your career, in your family, and in the kingdom, I thought, well, one of those three I can nail. The second one I can partially be in, and a third one I'm going to outsource to somebody else because I can't do all of those. But you proved it. And the DNA of the Master's Program at the end of the day is to say, look at Jesus clarified the scope of what he's asked us to do in three things summed in the two great commandments and the Great Commission: love God, love people, make disciples, or teach other people how to love God, love people in this process. In the master's program, we're passionate about the Great Commission, and I know how much it means to you. You're on the forefront of everything with Sprint to the Finish. Your long work with the Issachar movement, Finish the Task, and beyond. You've been a leader in this. Can you speak a little bit to your passion towards that and how TMP is playing a role directly in the vision to see every people group reached with the gospel?
At the end of the day, we've been helping folks get their arms around their calling. That's got a lot of sizzle. You don't have to be a Christian to want to know what your calling is. And I read the reports as you do of people who have retired out of a multinational corporation and now they own a little art gallery in Cape Cod and they say they've found their calling. Well, that's the culture's attempt to replicate something that God has custody over. Calling is about me finding my best contribution to the primary business of heaven on earth. And the primary business of heaven on earth is to complete the work that Jesus came to start, that the redemption of lost people and the declaration of the gospel to every remaining people group are the business of God, that it has a endpoint, a countdown clock connected to it. There are a lot of things that we do today to serve mankind and to perpetuate positive things. And I'm sure that most of the folks that are involved in our community do business that's desirable and beneficial and honest and highest integrity. But our business plans are not the delay point for the return of Jesus. In fact, all of the great faith-driven works of helping widows and orphans and drilling wells and building schools and addressing human trafficking and all of the things that are happening by Christians out to try and push back against the infusion of evil into the human experience. All of those are good things, but they will all be left unfinished when the Jesus returns moment occurs. That moment will come, according to Jesus, when the gospel has been carried to the last remaining corners of the world, where people groups have yet to hear that God loved them so much that he sent his son, that Jesus came and lived and died and rose again, and that through the redemptive blood of the cross, they can be brought into forgiveness and life in the family of God. When that message gets around, Jeff, I believe that the two notable generations in human history will be remembered as the generation that took the baton from Jesus when he returned to heaven, and the generation that finished the task of taking the gospel to the remaining outlying locations and peoples. The generation that got us started and the generation that gets us finished will be the two notable generations of biblical history. And I believe that we're living in the second of those. Great work that happened for 2,000 years. I'm not dismissing that at all. But I believe, and we've got credible evidence, biblically validated to back us up, to say that the conditions under which the return of the Lord Jesus could occur will be on the ground and provable within the next handful of years. I believe it's entirely possible that the end of all things may well happen on your watch. And I'm hopeful that I get to still be here and in a patriarchal way, still contributing to the energy that you all are generating, raising up leaders for the kingdom, but that leadership more and more. And I love the fact that hundreds of master's graduates are participating in pressing the boundaries of the kingdom to the farthest reaches of human experience. And we will be ready to welcome Jesus back within the next few years.
That's exciting, Bob. I can imagine the credits rolling on this grand drama and being there at the end to see this great moment come to be and to run all the way to that point. Now, when you're speaking about master's program grads and those that have been members, alumni that are seeking to arrange their life so that their business would create enablement, create freedom, so that they've got margin with which to not just go after more busyness, perhaps, but rather to get freedom from their work, to be incredible and faithful in their family, and then to be fruitful and to be fully engaged in ways with which to do that. Now, to be thinking about the time clock that is ticking, or at least the number with which the data shows don't have a single believer within that people group. What are the things that someone that have found themselves successful and want to arrange their life to do more towards this end? Could you put it into the find it, found it, fund it sort of mental model that we go through in the master's program to go after this? And how could they do that? How could we invite them into more gospel work in some way?
We've got hundreds, and I'm not over speaking here. We've got hundreds of graduates that have either started or have come and partnered and accelerated movements that are playing a critical role in pushing the gospel out to the furthest reaches. It's sort of like looking at a family reunion of folks that you're connected to and love, and asking, which is your favorite? I can't look across the sea of great men and women that are doing great things and say favorite. I was sitting in a board meeting for the Jesus Film Project 10 days ago, co-chairing that board with Kurt Hensley, one of our Masters champions. I looked around that board table, and over half of the current active board members for the Jesus Film are Master's Program folks. And the Jesus Film has been called the greatest tool for evangelism in the history of the church. We've had over 600 million decisions for Christ from people who watched and responded to the story of Jesus from the Gospel of Luke, portrayed in over 2,100 languages, in which it has now been lip synced with an audio track. I look at the finishing fund with our dear friend and virtual master's grad, Doug Cobb, and again, dozens of master's program partners who are involved in that effort, and working on the remaining unengaged, unreached people groups as our target for the finishing fund. We are down to less than 25 groups. And now that number was 3,500 groups just 25 years ago. But we're now down to less than 25 groups who have not yet seen their first missional penetration of outsiders bringing the gospel in and communicating in their mother tongue, their heart language, the good news of the gospel. We will have projects funded for those remaining 25 groups in the next 36 months. And if history is any foreteller of the future, we'll have conversions within the following 30-month period, so that in the next 6 years, we would expect that all of those remaining groups will in fact have names written in the Lamb's Book of Life. And what John said in Revelation 5 and Revelation 7, before the throne of God, people from every nation, kindred, tribe, and tongue, worshiping the Lamb, singing, holy, holy, holy. We're going to have that cast represented within the next 6 years. And God could wait 1,000 years to bring Jesus back, but he won't bring him back one day before that's been completed.
Bob, this has been a fun and enlightening conversation. Everything from the way with which the gospel is going out to those that haven't heard yet, to the opportunity to participate in that here in whether you're catching this through the show, the podcast, the email. In the notes are some links and some references with which you can follow through and find out about ways with which you can participate, pray for, and give to those amazing places where this is going on. Also in the links will include the master's program, mastersprogram.org, as you may be wanting to consider ways to get involved. Maybe it's time for you to go through the master's program again, invite someone that's in your influence or family to join the master's program, or to give to what we do as a nonprofit Christian ministry. Bob, I'm a benefactor of your pour in. I'm excited to have taken the baton with a crowd of great leaders alongside of me for us to rush forward and see to it that this generation takes this goodness and replicates it, and that we would see leaders replicate leaders and a whole network of amazing gospel stories that we'll be celebrating forever. God bless you, Bob, and thank you so much for what you've done for me and for the thousands of other men and women that you've poured into.
It's my privilege.
All right. This has been a special opportunity for us to present to you the Master's Program. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. God bless you. We'll see you next time.